we've passed the 100-day mark in terms of how long until the election. And so I thought I would start doing a video every day where I talk about kind of politics, big picture stuff, and also some of the different issues and the election, et cetera. And so for my first video, kind of wanted to give an assessment of where I think the race is and my thoughts on it. My big picture takeaway is that the Democratic Party deserves to lose, but America doesn't deserve Trump. Let me explain that. So if you watched my last video, first of all, thank you. But if you watched my last video, you know that I thought that Joe Biden needed to step down. I thought that basically from about halfway into his debate with Trump. I think it was clear that he wasn't just having a bad night, that there were real issues in terms of mental cognitive decline. In retrospect, the more I think about that and the more I think about the last year, I think it's pretty clear that elements of the Democratic Party, the leadership, the group that surrounds Joe Biden in the White House knew that Joe wasn't up to the task and they were protecting him, which is another way of saying that they were hiding him from the public. That's a kind of real dishonesty that is pretty unacceptable. They lied to the American public, to put it bluntly. And then afterwards, in the aftermath, in that kind of 4-week period where people were saying that Biden needed to step down, but he was resisting, a lot of Democratic insiders were saying that people like me were bedwetters or just Democratic hand-wringers, a bunch of softies who were getting shook because Democrats always get shook. It was really dishonest and unfair to people who were giving frank and honest criticism. And now that we've shifted from Joe Biden stepping down to the party selecting Kamala Harris as its nominee, a lot of the same people who were calling, people like me bedwetters for saying that Joe needed to step down are now pushing back against the idea that this is an undemocratic process, that it was an improper way to select a candidate. And it seems that the only real consistent theme over the last year in terms of how the Democratic Party has treated this process and treated the voters is that they want to deny voters an informed choice. This is a devastating critique against the party, and it's one that for me is really hard to get past. I want to make it clear that I personally don't think Vice President Harris is a strong candidate, but I also don't think that's really the point here. People who know me know that I'm a huge sports fan of college football, and I've compared this in different chats to like the 2002 college football season where Nebraska was destroyed by Miami in the Rose Bowl, and that happened because the supposed championship game was set up where Nebraska was basically chosen through a flawed process that didn't actually take into account their on-field results, and as a result, they got destroyed. And so, the selection of Harris has kind of this taste of, old school college football where it wasn't necessarily about your results on the field. And what I mean by that is in every election that I can remember where I've supported a candidate, either through voting or volunteering or giving money, if I've supported a candidate who lost, that is, supported a Democratic candidate who lost in the nomination process, I've gladly gone on to support the nominee because I trusted the process. That you say that part of being within a party is that you accept that your person isn't always going to win, but that there is a legitimate process that goes into selecting that person. And it's really clear that not only has that been ignored, but that we've kind of been given a lot of shine. We've been overwhelmed by stories about how excited everybody is, how much money she's earned, like everyone falling into line. That's all well and good. But anyone who's followed nominating processes in the past knows that there are frequently candidates that, the establishment loves, who get a lot of money, and then they absolutely fall apart. This last cycle, Ron DeSantis was everyone's darling on the Republican side, and he was a complete failure. There have been other big names in both parties, from, Jeb Bush to, on and on and on. And the point is that Harris hasn't gone through that she was simply selected. Voters didn't really have a say in it. And every time people have brought this up as a problem, you get a couple of different rationales for why this was the path that the Democratic Party chose, every single one of the rationales that they will give end up being pretty harsh condemnations of the party and its effectiveness and its claim to be the party that should run the United States. So the first one is that, well, there's no time. Yet part of that was a function of Joe Biden dragging his feet for a month. But it's also the case that if you're asking for leadership of the largest economy in the world that has a massive military, an incredibly complex governing structure, then you can't make the claim that we can't count votes if you give us a month. We're too incompetent is not a reason that I, as a voter, should invest trust in you. Similarly, if the point is, well, any type of democratic process that either takes place at the convention or beforehand would be too fractious and would expose all the different competing interests within the Democratic Party, the first thing I say is, like, what you were actually doing is making kind of a broader claim against democracy as a process. And in one sense, it is true. Like, there will be fractiousness, but that's part of democracy. And if you deny that this is a thing that you want to do, that like democracy is too messy, then what are you saying about your vision of how the country should be run? If actually asking people, regular voters, delegates, who should our nominee be, if that's too difficult for you, or if it's too distasteful, then you don't really have a strong claim to democratic leadership within the United States. You know, as I've watched this all unfurl, it's been deeply disappointing. I've thought a lot about why this has happened. And the best rationale that I can come up with is that there's something that's happened to the Democratic Party because of its 8-year-long battle against Trump and Trumpism. There is a thing that happens when two entities, two organizations, two nations consistently butt up against each other for a prolonged period. They end up taking on some of the aspects of their opponent. And I think that that's what's happening with the Democratic Party. There's this great line for people who love classics, I think it was from Horace, who said, "Captive Greece captured her rude conqueror." And he was talking about the Romans, when they captured ancient Greece, they ended up adopting a lot of their customs. So yes, they technically won the war, but then suddenly Roman senators were wearing togas, and so much of their pantheon resembled Greek gods, etc. They took on all of their customs. What I worry has happened is that the Democratic Party has gone through a similar process. This obsession with beating Trump has caused Democrats to kind of adopt some of the worst aspects of Trumpism, one of which is this win at all cost mentality, where they say, we have to do everything we can to hold power because Trump is such an immense threat. The problem is if you go through the nomination process, or you go through an election cycle and you fixate only on winning, then you can end up kind of losing your soul in the process and losing your claim to being a better version. And a lot of times when I have these discussions with friends, I say, well, if all you care about is just beating Trump, then that's such a narrow vision of what you aspire to do. Do you sacrifice your values? Do you sacrifice your belief in democracy as a process? Or do you actually aspire to do something better and positive? And I worry that right now that this obsession with beating Trump has put the Democratic Party in a place where all they care about is beating Donald Trump. You can see some of that in terms of like the candidates and stuff that the party has chosen over the last few years. And I'm not one who's opposed to strategically thinking, but I also think that it's clear that you do have to believe in higher values. And now we're in a place where democracy is inconvenient. Counting votes is inconvenient. And the same party who has, for the last 8 years, talked about preserving and protecting institutions of, democracy is on the ballot. Well, we are throwing away institutions. We are throwing away processes. Democracy is not on the ballot for the Democratic Party. In fact, no one was on any ballot because when there was a ballot, it was Joe Biden. And now the party has just said there's not going to be any meaningful vote. We as an institution have simply selected Vice President Harris as the nominee. And I think that's a huge mistake. What does that mean in terms of next steps, though? As I said, the Democratic Party, I think, my point of view here is that they've so substantially abandoned their values that they don't deserve support. But that's really also not quite the question. That if, in fact, it's just, a race between bad and worse, then you select bad. On a personal level, I've decided not to continue giving money to the party, and fine, like the Democratic Party won't miss my $3,000. And I'll think through whether and how I'll support this candidate. And ultimately, the question, I think, is whether a sham anti-democratic process that produces a middling candidate is better than a legitimate democratic process, which is what the Republicans ran, is better even if it produces an awful one. I think I know the answer to that, which is that a bad process that produces a middling candidate is the better one. And that's probably the direction I'll end up going, but it's a shameful place to be. And to be honest, I'm really disappointed on an ethical and a moral level, if I want to be condescending, to people who are very enthusiastic in support of the Harris candidacy, because it seems like it grows out of a basic dishonesty in terms of how the Democratic Party is dealing with voters. And, my sense is that it might work. I think she's still a pretty substantial underdog. But I don't like the idea that the party, in its obsession with defeating Trump, has decided that in this really important way, they are going to adopt some of his worst instincts, which is to simply ignore the will of the voters because you think that you're entitled to something. That's not the way to go about doing this. And I think it's a shameful moment for the Democratic Party. All right, tomorrow I'll be back with something hopefully a little bit more positive. And I'll see you then.